On, shall we? I mean, all week whilst I've been doing breakfast, we've been talking about the NatWest scandal. I mean, this is just gone from bad to worse for NatWest. Of course, Dame Alison Rose was forced to step down. If you remember, of course, she was the one that sat next to Simon Jack from the BBC and basically told him the story about Nigel Farage and why he was debanked. She said because he fell below the minimum threshold for that bank. Now, the nub of this is that you should not have someone in that position revealing confidential financial information to a third party, particularly a journalist. So she then disappeared. Then, of course, the bank stood by Alison Rose, and then obviously she disappeared. But then they stood by Peter Flavel, who's the chief executive of Coutts, the bank involved. The Coutts is owned by NatWest. They said they had confidence in him. He went. And now, NatWest chair, this is Sir Howard Davies, he's clinging in by his fingertips. He says he will not quit after initially backing former boss Dame Alison Rose. Now, yesterday, he said he would continue at the bank, and I quote, to ensure stability after the resignations of Dame Alison Rose and Peter Flavel. It's also worth remembering, of course, that we own that bank, or at least we own 39% of it, the taxpayer does. And Sir Howard Davies said something quite extraordinary, I thought. We do have the support of our main shareholder. Well, is that true? Because the Prime Minister has actually refused to back Sir Howard. Now, many people are actually leaping to his defence, saying he's due to resign anyway, so what's the point of getting rid of him earlier on? And on the back of this, he actually had to announce sharper than expected rise in first half profits. The results soared to £3.6 billion from £2.6 billion just a year earlier. So the question is, I don't think this is the end of the story. I was speaking to Trevor Kavanagh earlier in the week. He says this story has some way to run. The question is, how much more has this story got to run? Also, what is the role of a bank? Should it be painting rainbows outside your offices in the Strand? And it's not just this bank. There are many other banks as well. And we're hearing from more and more people who have been debanked for a litany of reasons. Well, joining me now is Rob Merrick, Deputy Political Editor at The Independent. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? And as Trevor Kavanagh said to me from The Sun, he said this story has some way to run. Howard Davies insisting he's not going anywhere, that makes me think he might be out.
I think it's going to be a trial of strength, isn't it, over the next few days? Does the government decide, well, it's done enough to back up Nigel Farage by helping to force out Alison Rose, or does it think it needs to go a stage further? I think there are undoubtedly people who think that one senior victim is enough, two if you count the Coutts boss, and perhaps we can leave it there. But I think it will be a trial of strength. I think it definitely is a story that's got so much further to run because, of course, what Farage has done is expose this much bigger issue that perhaps went unseen. And we had the extraordinary revelation yesterday that the anti-Brexit campaigner, Gina Miller, her new party, which has been under the radar, it's fair to say, has been denied a bank account at all with the online bank Monzo, and then Monzo then came out and admitted that it will not hold bank accounts, business bank accounts, for political parties, which I don't think anyone's ever said openly before in the banking world, and is an extraordinary turn-up.
It is indeed, and of course Richard Tice has written extensively about how Reform UK got debanked as well. So again, banks stifling free debate, free argument. It's not the role of the bank to dictate people's political views, is it?
It certainly isn't. I think this is a much more serious issue than the Farage episode, which has opened this one up. Because, of course, in Farage's case, he was still being offered a bank account. He was being denied one with Coutts, which, when I read into it, seems to be more of a concierge service than a bank. I read that in one occasion they actually arranged an elephant for someone's wedding.
But to be fair to Coutts, the fact is that actually what they are saying is incorrect, because you don't actually have to have a minimum threshold to bank with Coutts. They do have leniency to give those accounts to people that they feel that people they want to support. They do provide banking services, personal banking services, business banking services. They also have a concierge service, so you can. But then other banks do that. Barclays do it, for example.
I don't know about you, David. When I got married, I had to arrange my own elephant. But I think My point is that the issue goes so much wider and is so much more important than the Farage episode, I believe, when it comes to whether there is a basic right for a political party to have a bank account. It just seems extraordinary. And I know MPs have talked about being denied accounts if they have links with particular community groups who've done nothing wrong. They're not illegal, but they may be controversial in some way. But I saw one MP speaking about having to sever those links in order to have a bank account. And so I think the great service that Farage has performed, if you like, is that he has exposed is not simply a matter of his own treatment, but this much, much deeper problem, which is something the government definitely needs to address.
Well, indeed, and we heard stories from people who are Lords, members of the House of Lords, their children or grandchildren being denied bank accounts simply because they were related to someone in the House of Lords who they deem was politically exposed, and they need to look at all of that. I know Dr. Rennie wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just think it's really important that we don't just say that Nigel was being offered a bank account, because he actually wasn't being offered a bank account until he actually made this public, and then Coutts offered him a NatWest bank account to try and make it go away.
So that's interesting. Also, the thing is, the role of the bank should be to provide banking services, to be dispassionate. Surely they're very happy to allow banking from foreign nationals, for example. They're very happy to take various other people into to give them accounts. But the fact is they're acting as judge and jury, and I don't think the bank should be in that position where they're making moral judgments, particularly when these views are legal. There's nothing illegal taking place here.
Well, the government is changing the law. I guess we wait and see whether that law change is going to be effective or not. We know that the banks will have to give people much longer notice period if they are going to sever their accounts. And more importantly, they're going to have to give them the reason why. I guess we wait and see whether that deals with this problem of what particularly seems to be a problem for politicians, doesn't it? I'm not sure there are huge numbers of ordinary people, if we can call them that, who are being debanked for their views, but certainly there is a particular problem when it comes to politicians and political parties. I don't know whether the legislation the government's brought forward is going to deal with that. If it doesn't, then it definitely will need to be strengthened.
It will. I mean, there are very good examples of ordinary people being involved in this. Richard Fothergill, for example, the vicar who was banking with Yorkshire Building Society, they said to him, well, we'd like some feedback how well we're doing. He replied, he's a vicar, he said, I'm deeply concerned about the way that you champion in the T of LGBT. I'm worried about the prominence of pride in all your branches and so on. And then he got a letter back saying, right, you're debanked. Yeah. But also just moving on, and you're right, there's an independent review taking place. Sir Howard says they've appointed a city law firm, Travers Smith, to conduct an independent investigation. They're going to look at the decision to shut the account and find out why. They want to look at the BBC leak and find out what happened there and whether it was against GDPR rules. And they want to look at every single Coutts closure in the past 2 years. Now, it then transpires that this law firm, which was called Travers Smith, the senior consultant there is an ardent Remainer. He penned an opinion piece saying that the Brexit referendum was full of xenophobia, racism and nostalgia. That doesn't sound very independent.
Well, I don't know anything about that, I must be honest, but I don't know about his qualifications, but I go back to what I say. I think that the deeper point is the attitude towards all politicians and all political parties. Gina Miller is the most ardent Remainer that you could ever find.
Indeed.
And yet she has been denied the right for her new party to have a business account. So it shows that this is not an issue of political bias. This is an issue that goes across the political spectrum and has been used to target politicians and parties of all persuasions. So I think that is the issue that needs to be tackled, rather than focusing on the political views of one individual of a debate that was had 7 years ago.
I asked this question yesterday, and finally I'll just get your view on it. I said Nigel Farage is probably the most effective political campaigner I have ever met. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think that's the other fascinating thing about this whole episode, isn't it? That Farage, kind of slipped into the background, has shown himself to be able to tap into and manipulate public opinion in a way that almost no politician can. And of course, it's also shown the absolute desperation, determination of the Conservative government to back him up when they think that he has got public opinion behind him, because, of course, the Conservatives are and remain terrified of him. Farage has said he's not going to return to the political scene ahead of the general election. Will he or won't he?
Do you believe that? Do you believe that?
Very, very scared that he will.
Do you think he will return?
I think he will be tempted. I think I suppose it depends on the political situation next year. It depends whether he thinks he can have an impact. Maybe he hasn't made up that decision and made that decision. It must be a temptation for him when he sees that he can still achieve the limelight in this way. And certainly there are Conservatives who are very nervous that while perhaps the government was right to think it had to row in behind Farage, in doing so, it has given him a fresh platform, a fresh cause, and perhaps a fresh reason to come back to the front line of political politics, British politics next year.
I agree. Rob Merrick, thank you very much indeed for your time. Rob Merrick, Deputy Political Editor at The Independent.